Hello, my name is Camilla and I'm a first-year medical student in the United States. I wanted to make a video about how I study in medical school and the reason that I was holding off until I was done with my first semester is because the way I studied changed so much. It would change within the week, it would change within the months, and even 3 months into the school, I was still changing the way that I was studying. But now that I've sort of settled on one way that I'm doing things, I wanted to make a video and show how I study now. First of all, let me start off by saying I go to a DO program in the United States, and our curriculum is run as an integrated curriculum. So a lot of schools are run differently, especially the MD programs, where a lot of times programs will focus on one science at a time. So say you come into medical school and you start off with biochemistry, and you pretty much do a month or two of just biochemistry and from start to end. What my school does is when we came in, we immediately got a little bit of each science. So I was doing biochemistry, pathology, physiology, immunology, all the sciences you can think of together, but I was getting a little bit of each instead of getting a deeper dive into each one separately. So because of this, when you're thinking about how I'm studying and considering if you should study the way I studied, just know that I'm basing it off my integrated curriculum, and your school and your program might be running differently, so studying like the way I am studying might not be the best way for you. Another reason that I say that is because a lot of the resources that we typically see med students use actually don't work really well for the way my program is structured. For example, ANKI is a very helpful resource, and if you don't know, it's a really huge ANKI deck. It's like 30,000 cards that are quick, they're closed captioned, so it's just like a one word missing from the card, and they're laid out to get tagged with certain videos. So if you watch a Boards and Beyond video on, say, glycolysis, then you can go ahead into the ANKI deck, unsuspend those cards specifically related to that Boards and Beyond video on glycolysis, and you get like 40 cards that you can then work through. So I originally really wanted to use ANKI, and I thought it would be really helpful until I realized that because we only get a sprinkle of each science, it was actually not the best resource for me to use, and I spent a lot of time just trying to find the right cards to unsuspend, and that wasted a lot of my time instead of me going in and studying them. And so what I mean by that is if I went to go watch a video on glycolysis for Boards and Beyond, because we covered a little bit of glycolysis, I quickly realized that the 30-minute Boards and Beyond video, I only really understood about 10 minutes of it because we haven't completely covered everything that we are going to in glycolysis. So out of those 10 minutes, the first 5 minutes of the video I would understand, and then all of a sudden I would be lost again, and then like minute 15 I would understand again, but only for a minute. And so going in and unsuspending those cards just didn't make sense because I didn't even understand what half the video was about because I never even got lectured in it yet. So because of that, about a month in, I decided that ANKI wasn't going to be a good resource for me, and so I didn't use that at all. This is really something you're only going to understand if you go to an integrated curriculum school, just like I am. So that's also important to decide what kind of curriculum you want to be a part of when you're deciding on what school you want to go to. So now let's get into how I study. In the beginning of the year, when they told us that everything would be recorded and that we didn't have to go to lecture, I thought, perfect, I'm just going to watch everything from home. That's how I started the semester, and later on I realized that I was actually more comfortable going to class and listening to lectures at basically the normal speed at the time that they were given, so in person. The recorded lectures are very useful, especially if you can't make the lecture for whatever reason. You can later watch it at home, and you can watch it at a faster speed if that's what's comfortable for you. But at my school, recordings don't come out until after the lecture is done, so sometimes if we had a 3-hour lecture, you would have to wait those 3 hours until the recording was even made available to you. And so I realized that when this was happening, I was actually falling behind in lecture, and by the end of the week, I would have a couple hours of lecture that I would be behind on. And so I realized that wasn't the best way for me to study, so I started going to lecture in person. So our lectures are structured 3 times a week, Monday, Tuesday, Friday, and they're 4 hours a day, apart from anatomy class, case-based learning, OMM, and other clinical skills. So when I go to lecture, I would use OneNote. I would download the PowerPoint into my OneNote, and I would directly take notes on the PowerPoint. So something that was super, super helpful, and I didn't originally start that way. First, I thought I was just going to type up all my notes because it's faster, but I realized that I was memorizing a lot better writing them down. And sometimes I found it really useful to actually be able to write directly on the slide versus typing on the side, because then I could draw on a diagram that he was showing, or I could color code directly onto something. Sometimes sometimes when you would have x-ray practice or CT practice, I could draw and circle directly on the CT or x-ray to mark certain things, so that was very, very helpful. So in lecture, my main thing was just to listen and take the handwritten notes. Do I ever go back and rewatch lectures? A lot of my friends will actually go back and rewatch the lecture later at 2 times speed, a couple more times. So by the end, they actually would have listened to the lecture about 3 times, and that's not something that I found helpful. I'm not really an auditory learner as much as I'm a kinesthetic and visual learner, and so to me, I would watch the lecture once and then I would be done with that. In terms of recorded lectures, if I did miss the lecture for whatever reason, say I decided I need a little bit more sleep and I wanted to sleep in and watch the lecture later, I would watch the recording, and I also would only watch the recording once. Also, when you guys have seen me watching lectures that are recorded, a lot of those lectures are actually independent learning, so they were never meant to be in person. They are actually originally meant as recordings, and sometimes we will get 1 to 6 hours of recorded lecture that we have to watch on our own time. So when you do see me watching that at home, that's probably that. Moving on to how I then learn from those notes. So one of the biggest things that I started using probably midway through how I was studying was ANKI, but it wasn't through ANKing, it's actually through image occlusion cards. And what I started doing is with that PowerPoint and those notes that I took in OneNote, I would go in and I would make each PowerPoint slide its own ANKI card. So if my first pass was going to lecture, listening, and taking notes, my second pass is reading through that PowerPoint slide and my handwritten notes and making an ANKI card out of it. So what I would do with the cards is I take one PowerPoint slide and I image occlude whatever I think is really important. Sometimes it'll be what's in the PowerPoint, sometimes it'll be a label to a diagram, sometimes it'll be my own notes that I took, and I try to image occlude a couple of boxes instead of just one, and then I group them together, so then when I do go through the card, all of the tags will show up at once versus one tag at a time. And so with that, I'm clustering the information, so I'm trying to remember everything that's on that one slide all together instead of remembering one thing at a time. I think it's more efficient that way. It also groups the information together, so it's easier to then remember later. I usually try to make the cards that same evening after the lecture or the day after. That way, after I'm at lecture, the information sits a little bit with me, and then the next day I can go revisit it with my second pass. The only problem that I've really faced with the ANKI cards that I'm making is they take a little bit longer to make, and then sometimes I do run out of time when I actually have to run through them. The whole thing with ANKI is you're supposed to be doing them every day to help strengthen that recall, and sometimes the time that I make them and by the time that I go through them, I'm definitely not going through them every single day for each lecture, but I have found that they are super useful when I do have them closer to my exam time, because then I never end up going back to the PowerPoint or my notes. I solely rely on the ANKI because I know that there's a card for each PowerPoint slide, and I just run through the ANKI multiple times before the exam. I also found this to be extremely useful right before finals, because once I get to finals, I know that I have all my ANKI cards done, and once again, I can just spend the time going through all the ANKI cards. Everything is grouped together, and it's just efficient for me that way. So next thing that I do that I find really useful is when I don't understand anything, I go to our tutoring center. We have a lot of second years that tutor the first years in different subjects, and so if I feel like I went to a lecture and I didn't understand it, I will go there with my PowerPoint and my OneNote, and I will go through the PowerPoint with the tutor, and I will take extra notes. I use the tutoring center quite a lot, and it's been really helpful to help clarify things that I didn't understand. I take extra notes on the PowerPoint, and then I'll make new cards or make the ANKI cards from that as well. Next thing is outside resources. So like I said in the beginning, with the integrated curriculum, it's been a little bit difficult to use all the outside resources there are. Some of the outside resources that I have used are Sketchy Farm. I've used Ninja Nerd on YouTube. I really like Osmosis because I think it breaks down everything just so simply and clearly. We also have a subscription to Med School Bootcamp, which I've been using a lot, and I actually really like it. I think it follows our curriculum pretty well. It also gives you practice questions at the end of each video. That's been my favorite one so far. With things like Boards and Beyond, like I mentioned in the beginning, because some of the things go really in depth, similarly to Ninja Nerd, sometimes I find that these are things that we haven't yet covered in lecture. So I spend a lot of time watching things that I don't even know yet. So I really only go to outside resources like this when I don't understand a subject and I need someone else to explain it to me. I know a lot of other schools and programs use outside resources like these as like their primary form of education, where they're going to watch all the Boards and Beyond videos and all the sketchy videos, but to me it's just a supplement if I don't understand something. I forgot to mention that in terms of practice questions, I think those are very, very important. Make sure that you understand the information that you're learning and then to get ready for the exams coming up. So for practice questions, I usually do the practice questions that our professors offer. Some professors give more, some professors give less. That's actually something that we've advocated a lot as a class, is to get a lot more practice questions provided to us so we're better prepared for the exams. I usually save all the practice questions a couple days before the exam to do then. I also do the practice questions, like I mentioned before, after some of the med school bootcamp videos that are provided as well. Otherwise, I don't use any other third-party resource for practice questions. So overall, to give a little preview of what my studying during the week would look like, I would go to lecture, I would listen to lecture, take notes on OneNote, I would then go home, convert all those PowerPoint notes into Anki decks. Closer to the exam, I'm going to be reviewing those Anki decks. Hopefully I've seen them at least once or twice already, so I'm going through those Anki cards again. Somewhere midweek, if I don't understand something, I'm watching videos to help me understand the concept better. I go to tutoring and get help there as well. And then I have these new cards that I made. I'm going through those Anki cards that I hopefully have already seen once or twice now. And I'm just going through those Anki cards over and over again, and that's basically how I study for the exams. Lastly, some honorary mentions. To study anatomy, we have a pretty good resource that one of our professors provides. So it's a website that pretty much gives you a very clear rundown of anatomy with concepts, with pictures, with dissections, and so I use that to study anatomy. I do sometimes supplement it with the Anki deck Complete Anatomy, and I will run through as many cards as I have time for there, but usually the website is enough. Another thing with that is because our exams are based off what the professors put in the exams and not like a standardized exam, that it's easier to just follow the resources that the professors provide versus following third-party resources. So most of the time, that's why I rely on the PowerPoints and the websites that our professors give us. And last thing is OMEM and clinical skills. We have that twice a week, OMEM once a week and clinical skills once a week. And for that, I mostly just practice in class, and then I go home and I practice with my roommate, I practice with my friends. Clinical skills and OMEM, I have less of a hard time studying that and understanding and memorizing that, so usually just practicing with my friends is enough. So that's a little bit of how I've been studying as a first semester medical student. I hope you guys find this helpful. If you guys have any questions, please ask away. I think the integrated curriculum is kind of an interesting concept, and if you want to learn about it, because after I started here, I realized how important it is to understand the way the curriculum works, and before making a decision to commit to med school, decide if the way this curriculum is structured is the best way for you to learn. Otherwise, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys next time. Happy holidays wherever you are, and happy almost New Year!